April the 26th, 2011, the work session of the Cuyahoga County Council. And in this meeting, we will be meeting as a committee of the whole. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Rogers? Here. Ms. Simon? Here. Mr. Greenspan?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Brady?
Present.
Mr. Germana?
Here.
Mr. Gallagher?
Here.
Mr. Schron?
Here.
Ms. Conwell?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Ms. Conley?
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, is there any public comment before we start? Is anyone signed in for public comment?
No, Madam President.
All right, we can go on to the discussion. Last week, we went through the rules and made substantial progress. Mr. Miller has prepared draft, I believe we're on 11. We've all had an opportunity to review that draft that was sent out within a day or so of the last meeting. And we've also had an opportunity to go through the proposed comments and changes that I gave last week. And we went through just about all of them last week. And since everyone's had an opportunity to review those, I didn't think it was necessary to go through them again point by point. Having reviewed draft 11, I'm satisfied with the rules as submitted. However, at this time, I'd like to open the floor for discussion for any members who have any additional changes. Would you like to make a statement, Mr. Miller?
Madam President, I share your belief that we've all worked very hard on these rules, and I think we have a fine document. And first, I would like to move that we refer the rules to the full council, and then after that, I'm going to offer 3 amendments.
Well, now, we're in a committee of the whole, and this is sort of a continuation of the committee of the whole. Do we need a motion?
Yes.
We didn't do anything last week on them, so what is your motion?
The motion would be to refer the rules document to tonight's meeting at the full council for approval.
All right, is there a second? All right, all those in favor?
Wait.
Yeah, but we agreed on this now, you Mr. Rules. We're going to submit these, then we're going to move, and then we're going to make an amendment. You have a couple amendments. Or you want to amend them first?
You know, Madam President, this motion is not accepting a substitute version. We have the version that we passed at the last meeting.
Okay.
You know, so now that the motion has been placed on the floor, amendments should be considered.
So you want to vote on this motion?
What I want to do is to next offer the 3 amendments. And then we'll see if anybody else has any other amendments, and then we'd vote on the full motion.
Okay.
Okay. Madam President and my colleagues, of the 3 amendments, only one of them is substantive. And I would ask if the Assistant Clerk could pass out the first one that says amendment on change of regular committee times. Okay. Madam President, I move to amend with this amendment that you have in front of you.
Do we need a second for that?
Yes.
All right, is there a second? Second by Ms. Conwell. All right, proceed on the first amendment.
And Madam President and my colleagues, this is an amendment that President Connolly brought to our attention, and it's well taken, the current rules draft does not provide for changing the regular meeting dates and times of the council committees. What this rule would simply do is say that, that a chairperson of a committee, with the approval of the president, could change a regular committee time, and then the clerk would update the list to reflect the new committee regular time.
Any discussion on that? Do we need to vote on it? Yes.
Could you say that again, Councilman Miller? I'm sorry.
Madam President, Councilperson Conwell, what this amendment says is that once the regular schedule of regular dates, times, and locations for the committees is established, if a committee time or location needs to be changed, that the chairperson can change the time of the committee with the approval of the president of council, and that then the clerk would update the list showing the new regular time for the committee.
The original rule didn't provide for any way of changing the schedule, and I just thought we're going to, while we're working on it, they would just leave us that opportunity. Because right now, we may be, if we have time at this meeting, we'd like to discuss some change. I know Mr. Jones is having some problem with his committee meetings, and, you know, think you may set a date like on a Monday, or it just doesn't work out, and you just want to change it.
Have approval.
Yeah, just come and say, we'll change it, and we'll just tell the clerk, and we'll coordinate with other people who have committees and make sure it's not overlapping. And
Okay, but it's not gonna, because I have something of that nature with a special fact-finding report where I had to make the date before council, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I want to change my,
oh, I was going to say, if it's a regular, if you're going to change your regular meeting time, if you're going to have a special meeting or something, that's different. But if you're just going to change your regular time, you always meet Tuesday at 1 or something, you want to change your regular time, just check with me, we'll have the clerk change it. And so now it's provided for in the rules. Originally, there was no provision in the rules for that.
Madam President?
Yes.
The chairperson of a committee can schedule special meetings as needed and just on your own. That doesn't change. This is only if you want to change the regular date and time of the week that the committee normally meets. Okay?
Do we need to vote on these individually?
Sure.
All right, is there any more discussion on that one? That'll be proposed Rule 12J. All right, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Your next point, Mr. Miller.
Okay. Madam President, if the clerk could pass out the item on technical amendment on ordinances and resolutions.
Are we doing this W? Are we doing W?
Madam President, the item on 12J and 12W, it was together one
Okay.
amendment.
Okay.
The item on 12W is just for the clerk to post a change. Madam President, I would move the second amendment.
Is there a second? Second. All right,
Yeah.
discussion?
And Madam President
It's
and my...
moved, second by Mr. Jimana.
Madam President and my colleagues, this is simply a technical change that Majid recommended, and currently the rules say, all ordinances shall contain just one subject, and all resolutions could contain just one subject. And somebody could read that, that all the ordinances would relate to one subject, and so he just suggested changing it to, each ordinance shall relate to one subject, and each resolution shall relate to one subject. So it's just a technical amendment for clarity.
All right, any discussion? All right, all those in favor of the adopting the amendment indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Anything further, Mr. Miller?
Yes, if the clerk could pass out the third one, please. Madam Chair, move the Third Amendment.
Is there a second? Second by Ms. Conwell.
Madam Chair, my colleagues, this simply corrects a technical amendment, a typographical error, a section number got changed and the change did not get carried over to a reference, so it corrects the reference.
All right, any discussion? All right, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the ayes have it. The Amendment 3 is adopted. All right, are there any other suggested changes or amendments to the current rules? Mr. Greenspan.
Thank you, Madam President. I still see Rule 5C on page 5 of 22, page 5 in the package. I don't believe we've fully addressed this issue as far as the...
What number again?
5C, Rule
Okay.
5C. I don't believe we fully addressed the issue of when the rescheduled meeting shall take regular meeting shall take place. And if we remember last week, we talked about the opportunity for 3 regular meetings to be scheduled with possibly within a 2-week period. And the opportunity may present itself where a council member may be out for a 2-week period and a 3rd regular meeting be placed in the middle, thus would cause that member, if the excuse was unexcused, to be removed by charter from his or her position.
You know, just as a comment on that, I did some reading, and I think I spoke with Mr. Morales about it one day. In the charter, and I believe it's section 3, it says that the council persons are elected pursuant to general laws of the state of Ohio. Then section 1201, I think it is, says that if you miss 3 regular meetings, you would forfeit your office. But in the first section that provides that you are elected by general law, I would think those would apply to removal. So I think there's really a problem with the charter as it relates to that whole section of forfeiture, because clearly you would be entitled to some kind of due process, a hearing of some sort. If you miss 3 meetings, I mean, you'd have to, the 14th Amendment clearly gives you some kind of due process. So I don't even know how they would even proceed to forfeit your office based on that wording when you've been elected by the general law. So I think you have to go back to general law to remove someone from office. But that's just sort of a legalistic argument.
Well,
Yes, Mr. Miller?
The other thing that I would add is that even if you changed Rule C to state that the regular meeting schedule of council can never be changed under any circumstances, you could still suspend that rule by 2/3 of the council and change it. So what I'm suggesting is that if the council really wants to change the schedule, that they can do so by suspending the rules, and so you're just not going to totally prevent it.
well, Madam President.
Mr. Greenspan, would you read again to me what you would propose to change then?
Sure. Well, let me ask it. I will. Can I ask one question in advance of that? This says that, okay, it doesn't give a provision in here for an example of weather. I mean, how much advance notice do we have to give if we have to reschedule a meeting due to weather or cancel a meeting? Right now, it's 24-hour notice, but if we don't have that notice period, how would we do that?
Madam President?
Yes, Mr. Miller.
I gave some thought to that issue, and the rules provide for a minimum of 24 hours notice for any regular council meeting. However, state law says in the procedures relating to public meetings that you can schedule a meeting on less notice, provided that when the notice for the meeting is issued, that you state that it's emergency requiring immediate official action, and that you state the nature of the emergency, and you and you issue the notice for the meeting to the news media. So if we ever needed to conduct a meeting on less than 24 hours, we would need to suspend the rules to allow for that, and then we'd have to issue the proper notice and statement so that we would comply with the state law provision.
So would we have to meet to cancel a meeting? Meaning, if we knew there was a storm coming, would we have to call an emergency meeting to meet to cancel the meeting that's scheduled?
I think, I would think as a practical matter, there's a storm, the building's shut down, that's when we would make the decision whether or not we would cancel, because Mr. Fitzgerald makes the decision as to canceling, closing the building. So we're unable, we can't come in here in a closed building.
It was just
So do you have a specific amendment?
Yeah, I did.
We're putting this on Fitzgerald.
Everyone but you, Dave. You still have to come.
Thank you. Since I have to come through Lakewood, I'll pick you up.
Yeah, but I live by the rapids, see, I can get down here, I don't have to drive.
Yeah, Madam President, to your original question, yes. First of all, what I would like to either recommend or suggest is in the title itself that we add the word regular, procedure and notice for change of regular council meeting schedule. The Rule 5A refers, 5A, actually 5B does not refer to regular either, just for consistency's sake. What I would consider and recommend is that at the end of this, of 5C1, that there's some provision is that the rescheduled meeting shall be scheduled no later than the next regular council meeting. That way you don't wind up in between two meetings, but the meeting is held between the canceled meeting and the proposed meeting. That's just a suggestion, or I don't, Ms. Simon shaking.
In other words, you would basically continue the regular meeting to the next regular meeting, and if we had business that, say we had to cancel a Tuesday meeting, and if we had business that was so urgent we had to pass, we could still have enough time to, say, have a special meeting like on a Friday or something, if just.
Or
was something-
reschedule the regular meeting.
How long, Gene, what do we have to have for the special meeting? 24 hours? Yeah, so if say we was a snowstorm, we couldn't meet on Tuesday, and so we had to have a meeting to pass certain legislation or something, we still have plenty of time to have a meeting on a Thursday or Friday, to set a special meeting.
Right. All I'm trying to do is prevent a meeting from happening within a 2-week window, in between the next two meetings. regular
Mr. Miller?
meetings.
Madam President, there is a logistical problem because a weather event might not be the only reason. You know, suppose that on a date in July when we're planning to hold a meeting, some huge state festival is scheduled that we realize that everybody needs to be at, and so we want to cancel or reschedule that meeting. See, it might not be the next one. It might be. It might not be. It might not be in the next one in succession.
I'm not really seeing the great necessity of this. I mean, I think the procedures are set forth fairly carefully. It's just, Mr. McCoof, do you have any comment? Or give us some sage of wisdom?
The one thing I would say is just something I said the last time, is just think in terms of the regular meetings. If you have the regular meetings scheduled every 2 weeks, and to really have the situation where you have 3 regular meetings scheduled within a 2-week window, that means you have to reschedule the first meeting, which is within 2 weeks, the other meeting, which is another 2 weeks, so you're 4 weeks out, and then the third meeting, which is another 2 weeks, so you're really taking away 6 weeks to place those meetings within a 2-week window, and then have to have special meetings after that. I mean, if council were to do, I mean, I understand the concern, but if council were to do that, it looks odd at that. I mean, the normal way would be, you know, would be scheduling another special meeting, and the point that Mr. Miller pointed out is the ability that, you know, even if the rules are this way, you could always change the rules. So if something is going to be fishy, it's going to be fishy whichever way. You know, there's still going to be a way to do it, and it's going to still look fishy whichever way it's done.
And if someone was unavailable, we still have the provision for excused absences. So I think my feeling is council is very generous on excused absences. If you're out of town or on business,
Well, let me make this recommendation then. Let me pull back my previous recommendation and then recommend, since we have the ability through special meetings, and the charter is specific only to regular meetings, let's just eliminate 5C altogether. And if the content on that regular meeting is so pressing, then we can go through a special meeting process or a committee of the whole to enact whatever legislation needs to be put forward.
Madam President.
Ms. Simon, because we need to get a specific amendment that Mr. Greenspan wants to make.
I don't think that by removing, I understand what your point is, that you want to avoid a conspiracy of the majority to schedule meetings, to eliminate somebody from the council. And to eliminate this rule to be able to reschedule regular meetings, I think is a bit drastic in that context. What I would like to see in these rules is akin to what our president brought up initially regarding this issue, is to have a removal process. I mean, the charter speaks one way, but I think with the due process provision added in here would significantly address the concern that Councilman Greenspan has of this particular isolated remote instance. I would like to see an amendment, and maybe I'll prepare one, to have a due process removal where council, instead of just, I don't know how it would happen, that if somebody's not here 3 times, they're just gone, poof, their chair's gone. I think we need a process in place to make sure there's been no shenanigans or chicanery, which I think would be enough to address the concern of Councilman Greenspan. And I think we need something in here to address that remote circumstance. So maybe we should add a provision for due process, for a hearing, for council actually to be able to speak to this removal, and I think that should be in here. And that should address it. If there is foul play, it's going to come out in the hearing, and I'm not sure that it's a question of this charter versus, the authority of the council versus the law itself in the state. So I'm not inclined to remove a rescheduling of a meeting, but I am inclined to put something in place to protect our colleagues in an event of this remote circumstance.
Well, I would,
Yeah, I think that, unless we have a specific amendment here, I think you should move on. I think that, is that your specific amendment to change this?
no, actually, Madam President, my amendment would be to remove 5C, now to remove 5C altogether, to delete 5C, 5C 1.
All right, then.
Change should be reported, but.
All right, is there a second for Mr. Greenspan's motion? All right, seconded by Ms. Conwell. Is there any discussion? So the motion would be, if you vote yes, you would be voting to delete Rule 5C from the rules.
Madam President, I just want to make just a pitch on this just one last time. The intent of removing it, if we had to reschedule a meeting for any purpose, a special meeting could be called to address the items that were to be addressed during the regular meeting. It just provides clarity that we're not putting ourselves in a situation, because the charter is clear only to regular council meetings, not special meetings. And to Ms. Simon's point, I believe that would require a charter amendment to address some type of an appellate process, not a council rule, since the charter specifies three meetings. But my motion is to support removing it. If the information needs to be heard, we can call a special meeting. Just doesn't have that regular meeting designation.
All right, Madam Clerk, yes, Mr. Miller.
I think that we can resolve my colleagues' concerns without having to go so far as to remove Rule 5C. If we want to deal with this remote concern, we should just add on to the end of 5C1 the following. No regular council meeting shall be rescheduled such that 3 or 4 regular council meetings occur within a 15-day period without unanimous consent.
Is there a second for that? I mean, I just think that's too complicated. I think that let's call the roll on the initial motion to delete this. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Would be deleting 5C1
Right.
and then renumbering
Yes.
item 2 as 1,
Right.
correct? Okay. All right. Where was I? Ms. Simon?
No. What am I'm voting?
To
on-
delete
this.
5C1.
I do not want to delete this, so my answer is no.
Mr. Greenspan?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
No.
Mr. Brady?
No.
Mr. Germana? No. Mr. Gallagher?
No.
Mr. Schron? No. Ms. Conwell? No. Mr. Jones?
No.
Ms. Conley?
No.
Mr. Rogers?
No.
All right, the motion is defeated. I think that Ms. Simon brings up a good point, that we could work on some kind of rule regarding a due process. And I mean, I think that I speak quite candidly, most legislative bodies, or many legislative bodies, has a member that's been ill. And you're not going to just kick somebody out because of illness. I think we've all been generous in considering excused absences. I think this is something that we can work on, but clearly, in order to have any kind of forfeiture, the person would be entitled to some kind of a due process. We can't just look at the rules, okay, Greenspan missed 3 meetings, he's gone. That would be clearly in violation of the spirit of the election laws that put you into office.
Madam President?
Yes.
Oh, I do have to say, but we've got this charter issue, which is interesting. We would have to, I'm not sure how we would deal with that, but we need to put something in here to address the concern.
Madam Chair. In Rule 5C, as Mr. Greenspan pointed out, it's saying that in order to change a regular council meeting or even cancel a regular council meeting, we need a motion of council. And in the case of the need to change a meeting, are we going to have a meeting to change the meeting? I think we need to say in terms of an emergency, the president of the council, can cancel and reschedule a meeting, and it still gives you 3 days, 3 days notice.
Ms. President?
Yes, Ms.
I mean, what this is saying is, we can't cancel a meeting unless we have a meeting to cancel it.
We have to come down in the snowstorm. So I thought you would like this language, colleague Germana, something, what you see in insurance policies, acts of God language, something like that. Yeah, so we could put something in, president can cancel a meeting in an emergency.
Like it.
What?
I like it.
The Germana amendment. Should we say the council or council president may change the date? Would that add into it? I mean, just like with all this construction and stuff around here, we could have a problem with the building. There could be any number of reasons that this building might be unavailable. There could be a hostage situation in this building, that the building's unavailable. There's a multitude of reasons where we'd have to cancel a meeting. So I agree, but when you're trying to set forth the reason to do that, so you weren't worrying to say the council president may?
Well, I don't think we just want to have the council president be able to cancel any meeting,
Right.
without a reason.
Right. When an emergency situation exists, of course, that's kind of nebulous too.
Madam President? I think emergency situation is fine. I mean, I think that's reasonable. We all can understand an emergency. So we would grant the president the authority to cancel a regularly scheduled council meeting in the event of an emergency.
I think it's true. Yes, Mr. Miller.
What I would suggest is that in an emergency, the president may cancel and/or reschedule a council meeting. And this would simply be tacked on to 5C1.
Second that motion.
All right, so say your motion again.
We would simply tack on to the end of 5C1. In an emergency, the president may cancel and/or reschedule a council meeting.
Madam President?
Yes.
Discussion. And I don't mean to split hairs, but this particular provision in 5C addresses regularly scheduled council meetings, not any meeting. So I just wanted to point that out.
You want a regular council meeting?
What this provision addresses.
Okay. I'll take that as a friendly amendment.
All right, is there any further discussion? You want to read your final amendment, and then we can call for a vote on that?
Append to the end of 5C1, in an emergency, the president may cancel and/or reschedule a regular council meeting.
Okay. All right, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Motion is
Did we
ruled.
have a second on
I
that
just
motion?
thought about it after I said it. Mr. Jemana seconded.
He did.
All right. Anything further?
Madam President?
Ms. Simon?
Thank you. In the unlikely event that the president is unable to cancel that meeting, do we want to go far to say that the pro tem would have that ability
probably should say
in case something weird happened?
Yeah.
So can we add to that amendment that we just passed, in addition, that if the president's unavailable, that the council pro tem would have the authority to cancel the meetings in the same circumstances?
We're going to have all these doomsday clauses, you know.
Kind of assumed, I'm sorry.
I think it's assumed, yeah, right,
That's the point of.
yeah. It's already- Yeah, acting in this day, all right. All right, any other discussion on the rules?
Madam Chairperson.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, Councilman Miller and I was on the Rules Committee, discussed this issue many times, and I'm not here to make an amendment. I'm here to support the rule as it's before us, but I wanted to, one last time, draw the council's attention to Rule 12E, advisory subcommittees. These advisory subcommittees will allow for council members to create committees that would allow people who are not on the council but have some sort of expertise to form a committee to work on a specific task. And we have worked over this, and Councilman Miller has amended the legislation in a way that I am comfortable with at this point. We've had many, many discussions about this. I just want to one last time, though, say that I think we should keep this in mind, be judicious about it. I'm concerned about a proliferation of advisory subcommittees and the potential of staff resources being stretched. In this case, since there are 11 of us, I mean, you can see that if we did not do that, we could end up with quite a problem on our hands. But that being said, I support the legislation as it now exists.
Madam President?
Yes, Mr. Miller?
I would share that I support Councilman Brady's outlook, and that I consider Rule 12E to be just one step beyond the pilot program, and that I might think about trying to create one such sometime in the second half of this year, and not anytime soon. So I certainly intend to go slow on this, and I think it's a good thing to be able to do to create a special kind of involvement, but we have a good number of standing committees, and we can only do so much, and I'm totally on board.
Yeah, because my concern also was about the public records and the public notices of the advisory committee. So we'll just go slowly on them and we'll work it out. But we have the basis in the rule.
Agreed.
Right. Anything further? Anyone else have any other comments, amendments to the rules?
Madam President?
Yes.
Sure. I sent out an email to my colleagues regarding a summer recess to be established in these rules. I heard back from a couple people. So is that something that our council would support if I put something in writing for midsummer?
Well, you know, I've been working on this sort of a tentative schedule, and I would be less inclined to memorialize a summer session rather than just canceling meetings if we had to, if we didn't have we didn't have the business, and that's what we're kind of tentatively thinking about at this point.
I don't agree that each summer the president would be establishing our travel schedule. I would like it in. I know the city councils have that. I think the city of Cleveland has at least 6 weeks. Most local municipalities have 4. State legislature, they seem to be on recess all summer. Could be wrong. So I think it's important for us when we're addressing our a fear that perhaps meetings are scheduled when we're gone, we can actually plan and know that from mid-July to mid-August, we have a recess and we can schedule our plans and we don't have to worry about being here and missing meetings. So I just wanted some feedback.
Is there any other comments? Ms. Kamala?
I support Councilwoman Simon's outlook. I think I've mentioned it to you, that we're setting precedents for the following council for years to come, and I think we need to have a set time that the administrative side knows when we're not in session. We're part-time. Just want to make that.
Do you want to draft something and we can adopt it as an amendment to the rule at the next meeting? And we can come up with some specific dates?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, when we were looking at the calendar even for this year, it seemed to make sense because of this county calendar that the best time perhaps would be mid-July to mid-August. And if we had to, we could actually schedule special meetings and get a quorum, I mean, if something really came up. So that's the time frame I'll be looking at, and I guess I'll get something off in writing to people.
Mr. Miller?
We have in the rules already the provision that a biennial schedule is to be created, which lists the regular meetings. We may want to add something that refers to that there's going to be, that generally consideration should be given to having a summer recess, but maybe not with specifying exact dates, just as a thought.
I'm sorry, I was conferring Mr. Gallagher here. I didn't hear.
I was saying that we already have a process in place to set up a biennial schedule for the council. And in terms of the rule, we might want to say something like, in setting up the biennial schedule, consideration shall be given to providing for a summer recess, but not specifying exactly what the dates are in rules. I just offer that as an option.
I think that's an option. I think the other thing we can do is we can make a motion to amend the agenda for this year and then have the official date change starting at the next, when we draw up the calendar in November or whenever the rule is, January. So we could make that effective the following summer, then just agree to the dates this summer.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Germano.
For 11 members of council with various different careers and businesses and in particular, in my particular case, I have 4 adult children in 3 different states, and my schedule is determined by, when my adult children are not going to be traveling out of state, out of country. I've got two children that are in business and travel. So for example, this summer, I'm not going to be able to conform to county council's exact schedule, but it ends up that it's my family's 4, including my wife and I, that's 5 different families are able to compromise on a date when everyone can make it. So I'm just saying that, you could go ahead and do that, but there's going to be some members of council that are going to need some latitude for their own private schedule.
Mr. Schroeder?
Yeah, I would agree with Mr. Germano that my schedule is going to be based upon business activities, more than likely. Vacation is something that fits in a day or 2 around something. So the days of taking off a chunk of the summer, those are, I don't think, is relevant to this body as it is to be flexible with the schedule. So if somebody needs time off, it seems to me our summer work schedule should be based on work activity as opposed to fixing 3 months or 3 weeks or whatever period of time during the summer, as opposed to trying to set something down, because I don't know how many people plan summer vacations around a fixed schedule at this point in time, at least with a busy work schedule. I'm sure, I would think with your litigation schedule, it's got to be a challenge to build it around trial dates and things like that too.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Brady, then Ms. Conwell.
Madam Chair, I agree with Councilman Schron. I think that no matter how we try to configure this, that it will not fit the schedules of the 11 members. And so I would, I'm open to whatever the majority, of course, that the council wants to do, because that's the way it works. But I would just as soon leave the schedule as it is.
Ms. Conwell and then Mr. Greenspan.
I think we need a summer session, or some verbiage regarding a summer session, because some of us want to work out in our districts and go to the festivals and get to meet the constituents. So if we set a specific time, that still doesn't interfere with people's business schedules. That doesn't mean that they can't take additional time. The charter states we are part-time. It doesn't mean that just because we set a summer session, it just gives everybody in the county and all the other organizations that deal with us to get their acts together and to know that, this is a time and break that the council was out. It doesn't have any effect if Miller or Schrein wants to go out of town any other time.
Well, I will say that Jean and I have been kind of working on a tentative schedule, and we talked to people at the administration. So why don't you give me until tomorrow, the next day, and we've sort of roughed up a tentative schedule for the summer that would give us some weeks off. Would that be amenable, and then we can bring this up again? And if you want to propose some legislation, but let's look at this proposed schedule that I've come up with, because and we're going to try to go back to, we've met almost every single week. We have not had a Tuesday off since we got elected. And so Jean and I are trying desperately to have meetings only on the 2nd and the 4th Tuesday, as we have prescribed. Maybe some work sessions to do these confirmations. So let me go and let me present this proposed schedule, and everybody take a look at it. I think it might be amenable to everyone. And then when we set the schedule in January for the next summer, then we'll have a better idea. And I think only Jean knows the amount of legislation that's going to come through. I know there's a lot of stuff in public works. We can't leave those things out there hanging. So I think we've got to kind of play it by ear for this first year.
That's fine. I just have to say, it's just an interesting observation that when most other municipal and governmental bodies establish a recess to enable people to plan, instead of 11 of us haggling over what days are good for us, I don't think that, I just find it unusual that we're considering ourselves so different that we can't consider a set date for a summer recess. That's just my comment.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Greenspan?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. My only recommendation would be, and obviously it's going to come through the workflow, as you said, we don't want to we don't want to inhibit the government, the operations of the government because of a summer recess schedule. However, I do believe that, and whether we codify this or not, that the chair may recommend during a period in between two regular work sessions, two regular council meetings, that no work sessions or committees be held as a recommendation. That way we still keep with our regular schedule, not to inhibit the work of the council, but to provide preferred blockout periods for work sessions or committee meetings. Because, for example, the Board of Controls is going to have to meet every Monday. So there are certain things that we cannot not be present. And so, and I know that there'll be members that'll be assigned and there'll be reserve members to fill if there are vacancies. So I think we need to be cognizant as we think of this in the operations of the government to keep the necessary workflow going, and maybe the suggestion of no work sessions or limited work sessions or committee meetings during certain periods of the year very well may be amenable.
All right, Mr. Germana?
Madam Chair, I just want to make sure that Ms. Simon understands that I'm not against council having a summer break. I'm just saying that there's going to be situations where certain council members are not going to be able to, may need to take other time because of family scheduling or business. Thank you.
Madam President?
Yes, Mr. Miller.
I would also want to say to Ms. Simon that there is a risk of county council burnout, and you're on the right track, and I have an open mind to how to deal with it.
All right, then I think I've showed the rough draft to a number of you, and we'll get back with you in the next couple of days and send it around, and then we can discuss that. All right. All right, anything else as to these rules?
Madam President, yes. I've had conversations with a few members of the council regarding the possibility of the creation of an additional committee or committee to deal with issues of education. And I'm not sure if we want to deal with that during this conversation or if we want to address it at some other point, but I think it's something that's important that we should.
It is absolutely important. I had talked to you about it, and I talked to Ms. Simon about it, and then she said that we were going to, I think she talked with you. There's a question of whether we create an 11th committee or add it to an existing committee. I want to get together then with Mr. Bibb and kind of work out what we're actually going to be doing on it, but I think it's an excellent idea. It's something that needs to be done, and we can deal with it probably within the next couple of weeks. Because I don't know if I know Ms. Simon was very interested, and you're very interested in it. I don't know if we should have co-chairs or which committee to put it in, but it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. Okay?
Madam Chair? Yes. What I'll ask to do is just with Councilman, my colleague Rogers, to get something in writing about what we would recommend. And I'm looking at just to get it on the table, an 11th committee.
That's fine. All right, anything further? All right, is there a motion to adopt these rules as amended?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Miller and seconded by Mr. Brady that we adopt the draft 11 as amended. Is there any further discussion? Hopefully not. We've killed many trees on this, in this whole process, and used up many printer cartridges on various printers. Do you want to do this by roll, or can we do this by voice vote? All right, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The final rules are adopted.
Madam President?
And will be sent to the clerk for correction, addition of the amendment and.
Adopted at the meeting.
Right. Oh, that's right, sorry. I'm thinking we're in a regular meeting. Thank you, Mr. Germana. All right, so the recommendation, this will be a recommendation to adopt them at the regular meeting. All right, I'm jumping the gun here. I was so happy to get these adopted. All right, that being completed, we now can, I believe that there was discussion that needs to be done regarding the Ethics Committee as a committee of the whole? The ethics rule. There's some possible
Preliminary
amendments, I
discussion.
understand.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Madam President.
Mr. Greenspan.
During the, and thank goodness we have Majid on board to help us. Majid has reviewed, and these proposed amendments are in Article 7 in our local provisions. Do they have a copy? You're going to be receiving now an ordinance to amend a few of the provisions in the ethics ordinance. I have one here. What you're receiving now will be presented later as a substitute to the amendment that's in the package. But I just want to go over with you, and Majid will as well, some of the rationale behind some of these items. And actually, why don't I just ask Majid if he would mind going through and identifying these amendments?
In your original package, page 43 is the Code of Ethics.
I'm sorry, with all due respect, Law Director McClure.
No, I'm just telling them the page number.
Well,
No,
Mr.
thank
McClure.
you. I can go through them and
Okay.
explain the revisions, and if all the council members have the substitute ordinance. And what happened is we ran into a number of issues, and the Inspector General raised the question that some of the provisions were ambiguous in her ability to enforce them, and then we checked with Councilmember Greenspan as to what the original intent was and tried to revise the language to go back to the original intent. And let me go through them. The first, this basically amends a number of sections, and the way it does it is it has the section numbers, the additions are bolded, and then the deletions are stricken out. The first revision is basically a revision to anything of value. We just limited it to Article 7 and excluded campaign contributions from the definition of anything of value because that is addressed in a different provision in the ordinance. So that's on the second page as you're going through it. If you go further down, the definition of contractor.
Page number?
Well, he's on that's what I was trying to do, give the page number. He is now on the handout, page 2 of the handout, and not the one in the book.
So, and I can do that, yeah. With the handout, on the we amended a number of the, or proposed amendments to a number of the sections in the ethics ordinance. They are all in Article 7, which is the local provision. Obviously, we're not affecting any of the Ohio provisions. The definition of anything of value, we excluded from the definition of anything of value campaign contribution because that is addressed in other parts of the ordinance, and it has its own definition. That's on the first page going into the second page. If you go 5 pages in, we just changed the term contractor, the word business, we changed it to entity there. If you go further to the definition of position of profit, again, some technical, there was an extra colon and commas and quotation marks, we took those out. Then if you go to section 15, which we address, if you go at the end of section 1, we added the word to clarify what that provision means. Section 22, which is the disclosure of conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest, the issue came up if the person recuses themselves on the record and it's obvious that they've recused themselves, whether they have to also do a statement to the Inspector General about the conflict when the recusal has happened. So we put the statement, unless the public official or employee recuses themselves because already it's been identified. If you go further down to section C, it says we deleted the language about the requirement to disclose it to the Inspector General because that's already addressed in A. There is the requirement it's duplicative language basically. There is the requirement to report it to the Inspector General if it has not been recused. Section 26 is where more revisions came because the language as it read had a prohibition on appointments to boards if the person was within the employ of the county during any time within the last 12 months. We have a number of boards where, by statute, even you have requirements that a county person actually serve on the board. And the Ohio Attorney General does have an index of compatibility of offices. What the amendment was is you defer to the index of compatibility of offices as to whether the appointment is incompatible. If the index of compatibility is silent, then you get an opinion from the Inspector General, and the Inspector General gives the opinion within 5 days to basically whether there is any incompatibility with the appointment.
And Mr. McClure, if I may, within that compatibility, the index, it also states if a position is incompatible. So it is specific to both sides of the equation.
Yeah, it is literally an index. It says if you serve in this position, you can't do X, Y, Z, and if you serve in this, and it's basically an index of opinions that have been issued by the Attorney General over the years. But we wanted to also go further. If it's silent, to have a procedure for having an opinion on it, and that's where the Inspector General came in to provide the opinion within 5 days. On Section 29, and this doesn't apply to the elected officials because you're subject to the disclosure requirements with the Ohio Ethics Commission, but it's for the management personnel that there was the requirement to file the financial disclosure statements, but it didn't put a date as to when you have to do that, so we inserted June 30th as the date to do that. For you, I think it's April 15 with the Ohio Ethics. That doesn't affect that. The Section 32 and 33 is, and actually the same goes to 34 and 35. There are provisions as to lobbyists and contractors. And what we did is we did a number of things there. There was provisions for application process and the registration process. And I think the intent was, the application registration is one and the same, that you do the application to register. And there was some procedure that the application is twice a year. So it clarifies that there is, one application, which is really the registration process. Clarified that the term that because all the registrations expire December 31st of that year. So we clarified that the expiration is for the, respective registration year. If you register this year for next year, it's not expiring December 31st this year. It expires December 31st next year. The other thing we did is we added an implementation date because we want to have clarity when those terms go into effect, and it's July 31st, 2011, to give the Inspector General an opportunity to develop the form and the procedures so that there is an application process in place when we start implementing these things, that we have the application ready for the contractors and the lobbyists to be able to do that. And then sections 33 basically and 35, we clarified the language to go back to the original intent. There was some confusion as to what for or on behalf meant, and we clarified it that it's for the purpose of influencing the elected official or candidate on any matter of county business, and put the explanation that that it wasn't intended to bar contributions when they're properly reported in accordance with law. Those are the revisions. We added another Article 10 to the, and this is on the very last page, and we basically borrowed the language from the charter and amended it a little bit for purposes of the ordinance, which I think the Clerk of Council already has that power, but we clarified it in case there are typographical errors, giving the Clerk of Council, with consultation with the Director of Law, the ability to go through the ordinance and correct any typographical errors and things of that nature, so long as it in no way affects the substance or meaning of this ordinance, which I think the clerk already has that power, but we just made it very clear to have the organization there. That's with respect to the ordinance. The one thing I want to just clarify is, and so that there is no ambiguity as to the Section 6 of Article 7 says that we are still complying with the Ohio ethics law. So to make sure that there is nothing that's being done here is intended to change or water down in any way what the Ohio ethics law is as to the requirements of the Ohio ethics law.
Great, thank you, Mr. McCloof. Are there any questions on any of these amendments that I might be able to answer?
Madam President.
Pardon me, I'm sorry.
I just asked if there were questions, and I believe Mr. Miller and Mr.
Mr. Miller?
I have one question, either of the sponsor or of the law director, and it is regarding Section 26 on boards and commissions, where it says unless such appointment is provided for by statute, the county charter, county ordinance, or otherwise by operation of law. My question is, if you have a situation where there's no specific requirement that a county employee be appointed to a particular board or commission, but you think it would be a good thing to do to get county representation directly from an employee, is that allowed by this law, or would you have to enact some specific legal provision to authorize it, or is it not allowed?
It is allowed by the law, and the way that this is drafted is really two parts. If it is required by statute or by the charter or by ordinance, then obviously it's a mandatory requirement to have the employee. You don't need to go through the process of seeking an opinion from the Inspector General. If it is not required by the statute and you feel that it makes sense to have a county representative on that board, you go through the process to make sure that the appointment is not incompatible. And the way you go through that process is, number one, you go to the Attorney General's Index of Compatibility, and if it's silent on it, then the Inspector General renders the opinion. So it addresses both. If it's required by statute, then it's automatically required by the statute.
I believe Mr. Rogers had a question.
Did you have a question, Mr. Rogers?
I do. I may have an additional based on what was just said. So my original... Sorry, thank you, Madam President. My original question was dealing with the financial disclosure filings. We as elected officials had to just file on April 15th, and that was a due date set by the state.
I don't want to be quoted, but yes, it's April 15th. It's under the Ohio Ethics Code as to elected officials. And the form, the Inspector General isn't here, but I'm pretty sure the form is on the Ohio Ethics Commission's website, that it could be filled and sent in. My understanding is if somebody misses the April 15th deadline, there's an extra fee, basically, and then it could still be submitted. But so there is a penalty provision for not I don't have the requirements on me, but I'm pretty sure that is the process.
Madam Chair. To Mr. Rogers. It was just respond on yours. There's different dates. I read that form since I was late recently. April 15th is the date, so I was going to put it in like a tax date. But there's different provisions in that say if you're running, if it's an election time, there's different dates that disclosure form has to be in. So don't go by just the April 15th date. You have to find out, read it, the different dates. They give you different times. One's in January, one's in February, and one's in April.
Madam Chairperson.
Yes, Mr. Brady.
There is an annual ethics report, and that's the April ethics report. The other reports are reports of financial contributions, and they are staggered and different depending on the election cycle. There's only one ethics report.
But this requirement is, not arbitrarily, he's picked June the 15th because these people are not required to file this form.
Precisely.
Right.
Section 29 does not apply to elected officials. Section 29 goes above and beyond Ohio law. So for instance, myself, I'm not required to file a financial disclosure under Ohio law. Under this section, I am required to do it because it's not necessarily, now it's required by this ordinance. The due date for it is June 30th for me. But that provision does not apply to the council members or the executive.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you. The from my understanding, and I used to file as a voluntary filer, and they were still due, even as a voluntary filer, they were still due on the regular file deadline. So I just wonder if this, even as a voluntary filer, if you file on June 30th, if we're still in compliance.
Madam President, this is our own provision, so there's no state statute requiring the filings of the folks that are required to file pursuant to this. So we can set our own date. And so because we passed this in April, we set the date for June 30th, because if we passed it, upon passage, it was due immediately. And so this would give people an opportunity to become compliant with our own provision by June 30th, and then every year thereafter. So they would file voluntarily with the state, and then a copy would go to our Inspector General as well.
Okay, it was just my understanding that even if you were filing with the state voluntarily, you still had a due date for a voluntary filer. And I could be wrong, but that was my understanding.
Was it, we can tell, I don't, if you have an agency that tries to, let's say the Port Authority says we want our board members to start, and I think they did that.
When I was on RTA, we filed
Okay.
voluntarily.
And I think it would have been the resolution or whatever action that agency took. If they just kept it to the state requirements, then you're going on April 15th, because that's the way that the RTA may have chosen to do it, or that's the way that the Port Authority may have chosen to do it. For purposes of the county, I think we did it because really it happened, this got past April 5th. A lot of questions in terms of when do we do it. We already are past April 15th, and the June 30th date was chosen, but people can still file by April 5th. For the next year and the years after that, it was more to have a date in there instead of any uncertainty. And again, this is purely for the voluntary, well, not voluntary anymore, but the requirements under the county code, not the state code.
All right, any other discussion on the ethics? So these are the amendments that we propose, is that correct? And council has been provided with a hard copy of those amendments?
Yes, the ones that were passed out by the clerk today.
And so at our regular meeting at 6 o'clock, then we will incorporate these into these will amend the one that's currently on file.
That's correct. And what the law director and I discussed was, so that we're able to track these amendments, is on the front page of the ethics ordinance itself, it'll have the original adoption date. Below it, it'll have April 26th as the amendment date. And as these amendments permeate through the ordinance itself, they'll be noted as amended on such a date. So if somebody wanted to track exactly when amendments were made, they would be able to do so.
All right, then we need no action on this, then we'll adopt the amendments at the regular meeting. Or do you need to make a recommendation?
What do you think, Dale? Should we make that?
Madam President?
Yes.
I don't think we need any action at this
I don't think so
time.
either.
And at tonight's meeting, what we're actually going to be doing is adopting a new ordinance which will amend the previously
Right.
enacted one, and the sponsor, Councilman Greenspan, will first move to substitute the new version, which has just been passed out, for the version that's in our agenda, and then a motion will be in order for adoption.
All right. We had one other item to discuss, and I'm not sure if it's a longer appropriate. We wanted to discuss committee meetings. Is that necessary still?
Not the ordinance number of that. We are adopting it. It's an ordinance that amends.
There was some conflict or concern about schedule for committee meetings, and I thought we were going to discuss that since we have about 45 minutes before our regular meeting.
Madam Chair?
Yeah, she's getting it together.
Right. Okay, basically, we were talking about how the new schedule of kind of just going back to having the regularly scheduled meetings and then not having special meetings in the off weeks of council. And so we were trying to figure out, well, with that, how best to do the schedule of committees in order to best accommodate for the administrative items to, go through the process, be referred to, have them come for first reading to the council, and then go to the appropriate committee, and then come back for second reading adoption or whatever the next step is. And so we figured out that there's really 3 committees that kind of have the bulk of the contracts and the administrative office type things, and that would be Public Works, Health and Human Services, and those 2 would be the bulk. What was that? Human Resources?
Finance?
And human resources for appointments. And so that was kind of the bulk.
Finance, when we come up with the budget.
That will be. So we were trying to figure out some sort of consistent way to have the committees that have the most in order referred to them and considered, and how best we could serve this whole process. And so, for instance, I was discussing with Councilman Jones about Public Works Committee, and that, like tonight, there will be several items that will be referred to the Public Works Committee. So when would be the best opportunity for those to, when will he get notification to go to his committee and then consider those items and have all the people involved with that process and notifying everyone who needs to be there and vendors or whatever you needed to do. And so we thought, well, maybe you should do like the off weeks. Well, then what happens with that is if you have it on later in the off weeks, then it doesn't come back to me in order to get it on an agenda appropriately and in a timely manner. So then we were thinking, well, maybe the committees that have a lot of things should be actually scheduling their committees the week of the council meetings. So in other words, it would be referred to you this evening if you had your meeting either like when you have to have 24 hours notice for your meeting and agenda, et cetera. So you would need to think in terms of maybe having a meeting on Thursdays or possibly Fridays, the weeks of the council meetings. That way you would have your meeting, you would have all your recommendations back to the clerk's office before the Tuesday deadline, and then it would appropriately then be put on the next agenda in order to be considered. And it's obviously same thing with Health and Human Services, and then any other committees that kind of have a lot of things that are then referred to them. And then those committees that don't have many things, we're trying to work as best we can with those committees to rapidly get things back on the agendas. But sometimes, it's not always a good idea that we put things on the agendas that say pending committee referral or, because they may not come out of committee. There's a lot of things that could happen based on what's going on. And once those types of things are on the agenda, they're out for public consumption and review. And not that that's a bad thing or that we're keeping anything from the public, but you should really have things on your agenda that have been appropriately processed and, and that are ready to be on the agenda. So we were just kind of mulling that over and are asking for any types of suggestions for you on how we can maybe have on a priority basis on who gets the most contracts or the most items, and then kind of, they figure out when they're going to have their meetings first, and then go down the line to maybe, figure out when to put the other ones that have less items for, committee work.
Did you, Matt?
I think we need to know what date is too late on the off week. Is Wednesday too late?
Well, the deadline for agendas is the end of business on Tuesdays. And so although, Wednesday for council members, is fine with me, I try and make everything work and to get it on there. But, sometimes that's not possible. So if the thought going into all of this saying, well, okay, maybe it will get on the next agenda, I'll work my hardest to do that, but it could not get on the next agenda. So as long as you're not looking for that to say, okay, this is definitely going to be on that next agenda, it just depends on what's going on that week, what work needs to be done, and that sort of thing as far as scheduling and finalizing everything.
Madam President?
Yes, Ms. Kawa?
I think I have to support, looking at the two different ways that we have it for Public Works, I have to agree that probably the off week, even though I was privy to the other week, in my prior, that's the way it was set. But the chair really needs time to be able to decide if they want someone to come to their meeting and talk about some issues. And if you're doing it the next day, it's not gonna, we're just rubber stamping stuff. So I'm kind of in agreement with what's his name, Jones, and don't say that. I think we should keep it on the off weeks.
Brady?
Well, I believe Mr. Jones had.
I'm sorry.
And Jean really laid it out very well. The other note I would add is that so many things come to Public Works. We've had 2 to 3 hour meetings. And one thing after talking to my colleagues that we could do is, make the meeting weekly. That way we can deal with, we can shorten that meeting. Thursday or Friday would be a good day. Thursday or Friday would be a good day because it does give time for things referred from today not to have to be on the committee meeting tomorrow. But we'd at least have a good 24 hours to post it and then have a meeting on a Thursday or Friday. And then things that come out of the committee, we have time before the next regular meeting. So that's kind of the thought process. Now, we have Human Services on Thursday.
Madam Chairperson.
Brady?
I agree with most of the comments that have been made. Our Health and Human Services has been meeting every Thursday since the beginning of the year at 1 o'clock on Thursdays. We will come to a time when we will hope that we will not be meeting every Thursday. And I would think that meeting, from my point of view, meeting as the clerk has indicated, I would be prepared to meet the week that she has indicated of the council week, and I believe I can be prepared to do that. But I think that this is generally at the discretion of the chair because every meeting's different. Your judgment about what's in front of you, who's going to be in front of you, it's always different. And so I really think that this is something that we can be mindful of, but really is at the discretion of the chair.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise the issue. Jean and I talked about it. We wanted to raise the issue. I guess it's a work in progress in terms of, and now under the new rules, you have an opportunity to change the regular dates if you see fit. So, I think this is an important discussion that we needed to have. Mr. Germano?
Madam Chair, the problem with Thursday is, right off the bat, you're too late for the next meeting. Unless it was really an emergency, but it's really past the deadline. So what I'm suggesting is that Monday and Tuesdays would be the appropriate time for meetings, so that anything.
Every 2 weeks, Thursday's not too late. When I'm talking about Thursday, I'm not talking about a council meeting occurring the next Tuesday. I'm talking about a council meeting occurring 10 days later or whatever the number is. So if we're only meeting every 2 weeks, and I know we've been meeting every week, so it's hard to imagine that.
And we're
But
going every 2 weeks.
once we go to what would be our normal chartered schedule, then if you met the week, then you could meet on a Thursday, and it would be in plenty of time to be processed and prepared for the council meeting.
Yeah, things are settling down in terms of Jean and I have been working on a schedule, we're desperately trying to go to the second and the fourth Tuesdays as provided in the rules, so that we don't have to meet every week, because we've met every single week since we took office, and I think that we can start getting our things together and go to the regular schedule every other week. Yes, Jean?
I just wanted to mention that the only reason we're bringing this up is so that we can kind of just at least be aware of what a procedure is or how we can do it, and how, we're trying to accommodate council plus the executive's side of it as well, and make sure that, everyone is taken care of. And even with Mr. Jones for his upcoming meeting, we put together an agenda for tomorrow's meeting that all of his items then were based upon a council referral this evening, so that we could have 24 hours notice. So we're trying our best way to accommodate everyone and everyone's needs, but, we can't always do that. So if we just have the understanding that, we're trying to work as a team and do everything right and as best we can, it may not always be possible for your items to move when you think they might, get on the next agenda.
And Mr. Gallagher aptly pointed out that we have met every week since November, not since January, so. All right, is there anything further that we want to discuss in the committee of the whole? We actually will have a half an hour to take a break between now and our regular meeting at 6 o'clock. All right, is there a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole? All right, second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. We'll be back in session at 6 o'clock for our regular meeting.